Draw a diagram where like you have one firm that supplies to a second firm that supplies to consumers. And these are graphed vertically, so they're called vertically related firms. Okay, so as I said, every result that shows up in the Cournot model has to show up here reversed. And we sort of saw in the last slide an example of this. Rocoque, more generally, what is the equivalent of Cournot's theorem, but reversed here? What do you think?
So
as the number of firms gets large, what happens?
the number of firms get large, the price goes up, and quantity goes to zero.
Exactly. So the Cournot's theorem says that as the number of firms gets arbitrarily large, everything gets perfectly efficient. Here, as the number of firms gets large, everything gets perfectly inefficient. Everything goes completely to hell and the market totally collapses. Right? So with complements, as the number of firms gets large, the quantity goes to zero. So this is sometimes called Bergstrom's corollary to Cournot's theorem. This is very pessimistic, obviously. It says that layers and layers of monopoly eventually kill off the market. It's sometimes also called the tragedy of the commons, because every person is trying to grab their part, and in the process they destroy the social value. Okay, and in fact it's related to an even more famous problem called the public goods problem, which we sort of saw in problem set 3. So imagine everyone can make some contribution AI to a charity. And each person gets a value out of the total contribution that's made, not out of their individual contribution. And let's say that each person gets some positive value. The derivative of their value with respect to the contribution is positive. And therefore, each person receives a value which is equal to their value as a function of the total contribution minus the contribution that they made. Whereas society gets a value capital V, which is the sum of all the individual values. So society would like every individual to set capital V prime equal to 1, but each individual is instead going to set little v prime equal to 1, right? Now imagine everyone's symmetric, then this little vi is just going to be the capital V over n, right? So what each individual will end up doing in equilibrium will be to set capital V prime over n equal to 1, or capital V prime equal to n. But society would rather set it equal to 1. So if this is the social value that everyone's getting, if everyone does everything privately, we're going to end up here, where if this is n, whereas the socially optimal thing would be to end up down here, with a much larger amount of contributions to charity. And as n gets large, this is going to keep going up, and it's going to leave nothing to be contributed to the social value. So this is the same result as we just saw. It's sometimes also called the free rider problem. Everyone is going to hope that other people make the socially valuable contributions to the common good, and is going to take all the private benefit themselves. Right? They're going to free ride. This is also called the collective action problem. So it says that in a large population with voluntary contribution, public goods become arbitrarily underprovided. The deadweight loss ratio becomes arbitrarily low. Okay, so what exactly makes something subject to this problem, though? What exactly does it mean that something is a public good? See me out? See? No? Does anyone else want to say what the definition of a public good is? The classic textbook definition? Yeah.
Non-excludable and non-rival.
Yep, and what do those things mean?
Non-excludable means that you can't exclude anyone from it, and then non-rival means that one person using it doesn't make the product worse for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. So non-rival, which is sort of the most important condition, is that one person receiving the benefits doesn't preclude anyone else from receiving those benefits. There's zero marginal cost of supplying to additional people. Non-excludable, which is slightly less important, but still important, is that everyone receives the benefit regardless of what they do. You can never force anyone to pay or anything like that. And ones that fail the first condition, that are non-excludable but are rival, are called congestible public goods. Ones that fail the second condition but obey the first are called excludable public goods. One example of that might be intellectual property, right? It's easy, it may be in some situations easy to keep people from using some drug, even though it would be costless to provide that drug to them, or very cheap. So the real issue in excludability is not whether something's excludable or not, absolutely, but how costly it is to exclude people. So like, for example, music used to be basically an excludable public good. It wasn't costly to provide it to other people, but it was easy to keep them from using it. Now it's becoming much less excludable in practice because it's so easy to do file sharing, right? It's becoming hard to keep anyone from using it. Also very important to whether something's a public good, though less part of the classic definition, is who knows what the value of the good is. So most of the things that we call public goods are not like intellectual property. They're not things that were developed by some entrepreneur who had a better sense of how much society would value them than like the people who end up benefiting from them do. Most things we call public goods are things like public transportation, where each individual knows how much they're going to use the thing and value the thing before they decide whether to make it or not, better than any government official does. And so another sort of criterion that makes something something we analyze as a public good is who knows what its value is. Is that sort of public, known by the public, or is it known more by some entrepreneur? Okay, so, but going by the classic definition, Yuto, could you give some examples of pure public goods, ones that satisfy both these conditions?
Like clean air.
Yeah,
Clean air.
that would be a good example.
Also, maybe like safety within high work.
Yeah, those are both good examples. So national defense, which is like the nationwide version of that, right? One person being safe doesn't make other people unsafe. Environmental services like the weather, or clean air, etc. The existence of certain things, like the fact that you're enjoying the existence of some tribe in Africa doesn't keep someone else from enjoying the existence of that tribe in Africa. Ideas are classic examples of public good. So like inventing a new scientific technology or inventing a new theory is something that's almost impossible to keep other people from learning about, right? Though the Nazis certainly tried, but how successfully, I don't know. And it's non-rival because one person enjoying it doesn't harm other people, right? How about congestible public goods, Mariana? Can you give some example of congestible public goods?
So it fails the first criteria that we talked about. So it
Yeah.
would be like fish in a pond kind
Yeah,
of preserve.
that's a
like
good
forest
example.
preserve or something.
It's hard to keep someone from fishing for them, but they're non, so therefore they're non-excludable. But but one person fishing for them makes it very hard for someone else to fish for them. So examples of that are roads and bridges, which can easily get clogged, but it's very hard to keep people from using them. Amenities like lakes, national parks, etc. are hard to keep people out of, but they can easily get degraded if too many people use them. Is that Adjoa here? No. Anyone else want to give an example of an excludable public good? Yeah.
Music.
Yeah. Yeah, so any IP type thing is a pretty good example of that. Another example might be land reform. So if you think about, like many governments took big estates and broke them up and handed them out to the people who were farming individual plots. And that's pretty close to being non-rival because, you know, the person who's by far the best suited to farm that plot is the person who's been living there and farming it. But you could easily throw that person off their land still, right? And that would be a way to exclude them from its benefits. Yeah, Karen. What?
A tollway.
Tollway is, that's starting to get to the point where it's neither excludable, non-excludable, nor non-rival. So it's not even it's neither, you know what I mean? Because tollway definitely gets crowded if there's too many people on it, and once you can exclude people, then it's pretty much not a public good, it's a private good at that point, pretty much. But it's a good question. So these are only public goods, but at least as important are public bads. I actually don't think I ended up with any public bars on these slides, sorry, that's good. Okay, so many things bring diffuse harms rather than benefits. So examples of that, those are land takings. So imagine that the government wants to build a road or a bridge or, you know, a factory, and it needs to get together a bunch of contiguous land. All the land needs to be put together. That means that if we're going to build this thing, it's going to evict a whole bunch of people from their houses. And it's not worth doing it unless we can get all of that land together, right? So in that case, it either hurts all the people or none of the people, and that means that basically the harms caused by it are sort of non-rival. That is, imposing the harm on one person doesn't save someone else from experiencing it. All the people have to experience it or none of them. Corporate acquisitions are another similar example. So if someone wants to buy a company, either everyone's going to lose control of the company or no one will lose control of the company, right, of the current shareholders. And so that's another example of sort of a public bad. Debt settlements are another example of this. So during the foreclosure crisis, there were tons and tons of people who owned little parts of the housing stock, right? But no one owned any individual house because of the way that things had been securitized. So to renegotiate and stop a foreclosure, everyone would have to have their little bit of the house renegotiated. And this is a big problem in Europe right now as well. FCC is facing a similar issue, which is that they auctioned off all the spectrum. Now the spectrum is fragmented into all these little parts, but you need to have big contiguous chunks of spectrum in order to put in WiMAX, which would blanket the country in Wi-Fi, right? And that requires them to put back together all that stuff, which requires disenfranchising, taking the property from all of the people who are currently occupying those parts of the spectrum. And I've actually been working with them a little bit on this. Another example of that is patent pools. So patent pools are ways of avoiding this multi-marginalization problem that we were talking about earlier, right? If rather than all the patents for complementary technology being owned by different people who will each charge a markup, you want to put them all together into one pool where you only have one person in charge of them. That could be very beneficial, but each member has to give up their patent in order for that to work, right? And that can, that's another public bad problem. Another example of this might be if we're going to build a new factory and it's going to cause pollution for a lot of people. It might cause some benefit, but it might also pollute a big area, right? And that's going to impact a large number of people, and there's no way you can make it just impact some people and not others. It's going to just, by its nature, pollute a whole area. So these are not really very different from externalities, but in many of these situations, the victims know a lot about how much they're going to be harmed by the thing. And that makes it really important for us to get the information from them. And that's, again, this sort of public bad aspect. So the equivalent of the collective action problem here is what's called the holdout problem, which is that if everybody has the right to say, no, this is my land, you're not allowed to take it, right? Then everyone will have an incentive to say, oh, you better pay me a ton, because otherwise your road is not going to get built. You already have the land from everybody else.